Yeah.
I'm incredibly nervous to be here and incredibly excited, but let's crack on. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about applying ethical thinking into product design and especially into cognitive products. Now, what is a cognitive product? A cognitive product is basically one that runs on a machine learning algorithm, that runs on artificial intelligence, or simply one that is powered by a more or less dumb algorithm. That is what a cognitive product is. So to give examples, we have robots. They are cognitive products. We have pieces of software, or we have devices, the smartphone devices that you're currently looking at, and I can see you right now, instead of paying attention to me. So the iPhone runs at least 3 fairly sophisticated machine learning systems. One is the Face ID, which is powered by facial recognition. The other one is the autocorrect and autocomplete, which is powered by predictive text algorithms. And the other one is Siri, which is powered by voice and speech recognition. And it's also powered by what is called semantic machine intelligence. Very sophisticated things. Anyhow, these are cognitive products. So I was struggling a little bit trying to prepare for this presentation, because I go to a lot of conferences where people talk about artificial intelligence and there are specific expectations. For example, you might expect that I tell you about what the latest achievements in artificial intelligence are, who are the most impressive people to follow on Twitter because of their achievements as scientists, data scientists. You might expect me to tell you what is the most well-funded startup in artificial intelligence and what the future of humanity will look like. Unfortunately, I'm not going to do any of that today, because when it comes to ethics in artificial intelligence, it doesn't matter how performant a technology is. The only thing that matters is you. Today, even the founder of artificial intelligence doesn't matter, Marvin Minsky. The only person that matters is you. Because ethical artificial intelligence is all about how you use your skills and how you use your work to ensure that artificial intelligence is perceived, understood, and applied in the best way possible for humanity. So this talk is not about them. This talk is about you, your role, your responsibility. So why is it that you matter so much to me? You matter because you, as product designers, as product owners, as product managers, UX designers, researchers, you have an incredibly powerful tool in your hands, and that is design. So with this tool, what you do is you make the most sophisticated technology accessible, friendly, and excited for everyone to use. The bottom line is you, as designers, make technology mainstream. And as soon as you start working with cognitive products, you will make AI mainstream. And that's why your role is incredibly important. But if you step back and you look at your role from an ethical perspective, what you will soon realize is that although you make technology mainstream, you are also, from an ethical perspective, the gatekeepers for how technology is used and how it is applied. So that's why you matter to me. So why is it that design is, just checking my slides, is important? And why is it so powerful? I know that design is categorized and it is divided between, you have UX design, you have web design, you have all of these different types of practices. But I believe that fundamentally at its core, design is a language of instruction. It basically reveals to people what is it that they need to do to interact with the system or with a technology so that they are able to unlock a skill, unlock an experience, or basically benefit from a solution or an outcome. That's what, to me, design is. So So when it comes to virtual reality, for example, it really doesn't matter how advanced computer vision is or how advanced computer graphics are. And it doesn't really matter how realistic the simulated environment is. If users are not able to interact with the simulated environment, then they are not able to enjoy the immersive experience. So your job matters. When it comes to, there we go. When it comes to cognitive products, Yes, there are data scientists out there who are able to develop algorithms that are so sophisticated that they basically look at databases and extract the most relevant traits so that they are able to create what is called a lookalike audience, and that is incredibly powerful for a marketer. However, without the interface, which in this case it's called the Adobe Sensei Audience Manager, without the interface, a marketer would not be able to master the algorithm, would not be able to apply the algorithm, and would not be able to learn how to step up in their job. So you guys are incredibly important. Your role is incredibly important. And that's why design is basically at its core, it's showing people how to interact with the system to make the most out of it. And also, you are incredibly important because you, in your job, are the only people who really study others and really try to understand how is it that the human mind works. So whenever you put a message out there, you know exactly how it's going to be perceived, you know exactly how it's going to be read, and you are able to basically manipulate the narrative. You're basically able to manipulate how people perceive the product, the technology, the piece of software that is made mainstream. Right. So to me, I think that design is at its core a language of instruction that helps people access experiences, skills, and different solutions. So I also believe that design is powerful because without good design, I don't think that people would be able to understand what artificial intelligence is. Without design, I don't think that people would be able to adopt it in their daily lives. So I want you to be aware of your power. I want you to be aware of your power because the next part of this talk is going to be a little bit heavier. So I also think that design can be used in ways that are fundamentally wrong, that are biased, or that are unhelpful. And that happens when you think about exactly who is it that you're serving through design. Most of the people here would like to think of themselves that they are serving humanity, that they are serving users, that they are serving people. But in reality, a designer, especially in-house designers, they are only allowed to produce work that the CEO, the stakeholder, or the highest payer agrees with. And so design is used to only put out there a point of view on technology, a limited point of view of technology, one that is in line with the company's point of view. If you think about what you're serving, you might want to believe about yourself that you're serving humanity's greatest values. But in reality, what you're serving often is you're serving conversion rates and you're serving short-term goals. So why is it that this is happening? Why is it that in our work we end up serving the wrong master or limited perspectives or limited points of view? Well, it can happen for many, many reasons. It doesn't really matter why. You don't need to feel guilty about it. It's been happening for this entire history. Like everybody in the world at any point in their life have perpetuated a false belief or a wrong point of view. Sometimes they weren't aware of it. Sometimes they just did their job and they weren't aware of the impact of their work on the world, or simply they were aware of the impact but just didn't want to take responsibility. So let's look at history. Let's look at some of the wrong beliefs that have been perpetuated. Now, the earliest representation of the solar system was a geocentric model. It was first proposed by Ptolemy in the year 200, and then it was replaced about 1,200 years later by Copernicus' heliocentric model. However, both of these models had one thing in common, and that is the circular shape of the orbit. Why is it that this is important? Well, it's very interesting. So despite a lot of evidence, despite the measurements that scientists have received, they perpetuated the false belief that the solar system, that the shape of the orbit was circular. Why is that? Because it was in line with what the church believed, what the religious beliefs, what the church promoted as being accurate, and what at that time was believed to be true. So what I'm trying to say here is that the circle at that time was considered an ideal or perfect shape and form. So God, as the ultimate measurer and creator of the universe, could only use perfect shapes and measurements. And so despite evidence, scientists still tried to fit their measurements into a model that used the circular shape. The first one to demote this belief was Kepler, who introduced the laws of planetary motion and demonstrated that actually the shape of an orbit is elliptical in nature. But little do you know, so you might think, okay, great, he's a scientist, he eventually proved what the truth is. Well, little you might know that in his earlier years of his careers, he worked really hard. He tried to prove, he worked really hard on demonstrating that the solar system had the same circular shape. So for 10 years, he tried really hard to still fit his measurements into a wrong perspective of the world. After 10 years, he finally gave up and said, okay, let's look at reality for what it is, and demonstrated that indeed it was elliptical in nature. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I believe that we are in a similar position today. I believe that we are still perpetuating false beliefs about artificial intelligence, and this tendency to perpetuate false beliefs about artificial intelligence makes it very hard for us to understand what is ethical AI, what is unethical AI, and what is it that we can or cannot do about it. It is very hard for regular people to understand what AI truly is, and it is very hard for designers. So instead of using their skills to ensure that ethical applications of AI are introduced and made mainstream, what designers are told to do is they are told to focus on how performant artificial intelligence looks like and how impressive it is, simply because it's just so difficult to understand. And so, basically, the complexity of artificial intelligence makes it very hard for designers to do their job. And that job is to make sure that artificial intelligence is understood, perceived in the best way possible. So let's look at some of the false beliefs about artificial intelligence that are still perpetuated today. I'm using the circle for the false belief and the ellipse as something that is a bit more accurate, just to build up on Kepler's life experience. So AI is generally believed to be a branch of computer science that eventually will lead to superhuman level intelligence. That is a false belief. Why? Because artificial intelligence is essentially founded on the computational theory of the mind. And the computational theory of the mind is built on the Cartesian dualism between mind and body. So the founders of artificial intelligence, they said, okay, the mind is the software, the body is the machine. If only we are able to understand the mechanics or the physics of the mind, and we take those and we put them in a machine, boom, we get intelligence. That's not right. What they didn't do is they didn't take in consideration the messy, wet, subjective world of what true human level intelligence is. By perpetuating that belief that artificial intelligence can reach human level intelligence, we are perpetuating a certain sense of powerlessness, in the sense that people expect now, any day now, they expect machines to be as intelligent as humans, and as soon as that happens, we are doomed. And instead of, so that's just generally perpetuated in many, many shapes and forms, but I do see it a lot in this form of kind of representation of AI, that it's, you know, some sort of superior form of intelligence, that it's this mystical, pure form of intelligence, and it is just not. It is not. It is just an algorithm. And maybe this is the most that it looks like. Certainly not like that. Another false belief is that artificial intelligence can be programmed to be ethical. That is wrong. It is wrong because artificial intelligence is simply a cultural artifact. It is no different from a toaster. It is no different from advertising, from a book. It is no different from a weapon. Artificial intelligence can never be an ethical agent, because to be an ethical agent, you need to have what is called the capability for self-regulation. You need to be able to understand the consequences of your actions, and you need to have intentions and goals. Artificial intelligence doesn't have any of that. So this has been elegantly demonstrated by Alan Winfield, who is a professor here at the University of Bristol. Very glad to be here. I think he would be a great speaker instead of me. Anyhow, he elegantly demonstrated that artificial intelligence simply cannot be programmed to be ethical by looking at building a moral engine into a robot, a physical robot. So what the moral engine looked like is he basically added what is called an ethical layer, and I'll explain what that is, on top of what the robot could do. So if you imagine a robot, the blue robot was the robot that was put in this ethical dilemma. So his tasks were, you know, walk, turn right, turn left. Another task that he could do was to stop the orange robots. So why would he stop the orange robots? The orange robots were representing the humans, and the orange robots were programmed to walk closer to not a physical hole, but it was perceived to be a hole, right? So that's what it means. That's what A represents. That is what the robot could do, its tasks and its actions. And then there was this ethical layer, which basically said, okay, if the human gets closer to the hole, then you need to go ahead and stop the human from falling into the hole. So what happened was that if there was only one robot and one human, then the robot would successfully save the orange robot, as in the human. But if there were two orange ones, which means two humans, he was stuck in a loop. He was stuck in a loop because the program wasn't able to cope, wasn't able to cope with the situation. It was constantly evaluating which human is in danger, which human is closer to the hole, what's going to happen, what should I do? So in the end, 14 out of 33 ethical program robots froze. They didn't do anything. So in reality, both humans would be dead. So Alan Winfield basically said that if you try to build a moral engine, you end up with ethical zombies. You end up with robots who simply do what we think we program them to do. But when the situation is too complex, they are basically not able to make any decision at all. So artificial intelligence will never be, well, not never, but artificial intelligence at this rate is not and will not be an ethical agent. The only time when we need to think about the consequences of AI is when AI is used to automate decisions. So in the law enforcement system, AI could be used to automate the decision of whether a person should be stopped, searched, and detained. Now, in that, I'll come back to that slide. So in that situation, what the AI system can do is it can look at different traits. It can look at a region, it can look at the race, it can look at the weight, the height, the criminal history of that person, and then it makes a decision. In the United States, it has been observed that people of color were more often stopped and searched. So that was because of a racial bias. So what happened was researchers tried to figure out how to fix this human bias, and the only way they could do it is by using what is called a counter-factual fairness technique. And that's basically neutralizing the effect of biased traits on the decision. So from your perspective, what you can do as a designer is think about designing a system as if you were ignorant of the outcome. So imagine yourselves designing an application, and at the end of your task, you don't know what kind of player you will be. So in this case, you don't know if you're going to be the police officer, you don't know if you're going to be the perpetrator, the innocent bystander, if you're going to be the victim. So imagine you have this veil of ignorance. However, at the end of you finalizing the application, you will be in one of these positions. So if you're designing a system with that mindset, then because you don't know who you're going to end up being, you want to make sure that it is as fair as possible to all of the possible actors. And I really love this concept of veil of ignorance because it really puts designers in the mindset where they can more accurately appreciate just how important it is to account for the different impact of your system on the different players or the different types of users. Are these noises supposed to happen? Sorry. Another false belief is that ethical AI is basically about AI doing the right thing, and that's not the case. Ethical AI is simply about what we do with artificial intelligence. It is not about what technology does. So because when it comes to ethical AI, we are not talking about technology as an ethical agent, the EU Commission has come up with a set of guidelines for regulating the use of artificial intelligence. And these guidelines were comprised of ethical principles, they were comprised of human consideration and respect for human rights, and a set of values when it comes to building robust or secure technologies. And it is quite big. It's about 300 pages long, and I just chose like 35 principles. So you can imagine that if you are a product owner or a product manager, you are basically looking at this document and you're like, what the hell? How am I supposed to comply with this? And what does it mean? How am I supposed to make it happen? There's a huge disconnect between regulatory bodies defining what the standards in AI are and their understanding of just how easy it is to comply with the standards. So in my recent work, I've been trying to address this gap. And at the end of this talk, we're going to do a little exercise. But for now, we're going to learn about 5 principles, which are quite important. Part of my, for the past 2 years or so, although I do have a regular job which pays my bills, I usually would go back home and I would volunteer my time to be part of the IEEE organization, which was one of the first organizations to draft the standards and the principles of ethical AI. So I did that because I wanted to make sure that I represent the voice of the startup community. The organization is normally comprised of 400 academics. So there's definitely a disconnect there. Anyhow, we're going to go through a couple of these principles and understand what they mean and what it means for you as designers. And then we're going to have a little exercise. So the first principle, when it comes to when it comes to making sure that AI is ethical, used in an ethical way, is you need to make sure that when you build artificial intelligence systems or cognitive products, that you account for fundamental human rights. One of them is privacy. Every human being has the right to privacy. However, most of the smart agents, they do not have a privacy setting that allow users to turn off the device. Alexa is in a constant listening mode. It always listens to your conversations. It always records these conversations, and they are used to further improve the system's ability to recognize what you mean. So that's a fundamental abuse of the right to privacy. So you as designers, what you need to think about is, how do I make sure that a user is able to turn off this listening mode? How do I make sure that users are aware of, are able to exercise their right to privacy? And obviously there are other human rights. This is just one example. Another principle is the principle of well-being. Again, we go back to metrics and to conversion rates and to short-term goals. Most of the AI is used most of the times to improve performance, to produce systems that are error-free, that are incredibly fast, that are super impressive. But is it truly what we is performance truly the best goal to work towards, or should we consider how we measure human well-being? Should we consider what is the impact of developing highly performance artificial intelligence, and what does that mean to people? So for example, we have companies who are extremely proud of having deployed systems that are able to solve repetitive tasks really quickly. But have these companies accounted for the impact on the jobs that require some of that automation? No, they haven't. So the idea here is that, okay, if you have a highly performance system that will maybe replace 80% of one person's job, it is your responsibility to ensure that it is deployed in a way that doesn't hurt the person. The person's job safety, or that person's ability to reskill or have enough time to adapt to the change. The principle of accountability refers basically to making sure that the system is as fair as possible. So this has a lot to do with data audit rather than with design. But from a design perspective, what you can do is you can ensure that every cognitive product has, at the interface level, has a system through which a user can report an unfair outcome, or can report some sort of bias that they have noticed in the system. The principle of transparency basically is about data scientists using the right technique, which allows them to understand how a system has reached a specific decision. But again, for you as designers, what that means is that you built within the interface, you built a form, any sort of way in which you can explain how the system is working, how the system works, so that users are aware how is it that what the outcome is when they interact with the system. Another form of transparency, of respecting the principle of transparency, is making sure that when you develop chatbots, you always reveal that it is a chatbot that you're interacting with. Instead of just starting the conversation as if it were a human being, you always need to make sure that you disclose it is a system and not a human being. That is one way in which you as designers can ensure compliance with the principle of transparency. And finally, the principle of awareness of misuse basically says that whenever you put out there a cognitive product, you need to explain what are the ways in which this product could be used in harmful ways, and you make sure that there are ways for users to report how it has been misused. But it also means, from an internal perspective, that any company who uses artificial intelligence or buys an artificial intelligence-enabled system, they have a responsibility towards employees to explain to them what the system does and how it works, so that there is an appropriate level of education. And that's just one way in which the principle of awareness of misuse can be interpreted. So now let's do a little bit of an exercise. So I want you to imagine that you are part of a team that has a responsibility to ensure a product is ethically aligned or is ethical. And that product is called Dr. AI. So it's a system that speeds up diagnosis, but it also collects information about users and shares that information with pharma companies or insurance companies. So I'd like you to think about how you would prioritize the principles that we have just talked about. So you can have a few minutes to think about it, but basically use this table to prioritize the importance. So the bigger square is the most important principle, and then you have a second less important principle, and then two minor principles. And so here are some of the principles that we have talked about. So take some time to think about how you would prioritize these principles for Dr. AI. And I'll give you 2 minutes. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes because I can, but also because in reality, you are always under pressure to make sure that Dr. AI makes it to the market. You are always under pressure to deliver and put it out there. So you will never have enough time to, think about, okay, what is the ultimate form in which or what are the ultimate principles that you should comply with. So go ahead, take 2 minutes, think about how you would prioritize them. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes. So just choose 4 principles, and I will just ask randomly what your perception, what your position is on this. All right, so that's it. Anybody wants to volunteer and reveal what their first principle is, the most important one? Yeah, please. Okay, another one? Well-being. You would prioritize well-being, okay? Another one?
Awareness of misuse.
Awareness of misuse, okay. Great, okay. What is the second most important principle? Just go ahead and just shout it out, I guess. Usability. So you wouldn't prioritize any of the ethical principle. You're like, go for usability first.
Security.
Okay, right, okay. Security, okay.
Transparency.
Accountability, transparency. All right.
Human benefit.
Okay. Awesome. Well, there's no right or wrong answer, unfortunately. The purpose of this exercise is to make you aware that every company, when they're trying to develop ethical technology, they will always have the same issues as you do. They won't agree with each other on what the most important principle is. There will always be conflicting points of view, and they will never have enough time to figure out what are the most important principles out there. However, starting with a minimum ethical product is a good place to start. Rather than ignoring the problem altogether, rather than constantly debating what is the most important principle or how is it that we're going to ever do this, or instead of debating, okay, what is the right ethical framework to use, you can at least prioritize. You can start with something. And having a minimum ethical product, just like you have a minimum viable product, is better than having nothing at all. Oops. So what did we learn? We learned a couple of things. That when it comes to ethics and having an ethical framework, you always need to consider the a blend of industry standards, of company values, of what you care about, but also a blend of ethical principles. It is always unproductive to debate whether you are the right person or who is the right person to say what's ethical or not. It is counterproductive to try to find the ultimate ethical framework, because you will never be able to do that. Prioritization is always hard, but having no form of ethical framework is always not a good idea. Just have some sort of starting point. And also, when it comes to ethics, it's a continuous process. It kind of changes over time, just like when you put a minimum viable product out there and you constantly test it and figure out what the right form it should have. It's similar with having an ethical, with making sure that your product is ethically compliant. Society will always respond. They will always say, maybe this is not right, maybe that's wrong, but just don't be afraid. Put something out there, do your best, and always start with a minimum ethical product. And lastly, I think that you need to be aware just how much power and responsibility you guys have. Whether you are a designer, or product manager, or product owner, it is your responsibility. It is up to you to ensure that technology is used in the best way possible. It is not up to anybody but you. And that's it. Thank you.